One of the seven wonders of the world, the Great Wall of China, stands as a proof of human ingenuity. Stretching over thousands of miles, it winds through mountains, deserts, and valleys. But beneath its towering stones lies a much darker history. This wall wasn't just built with bricks and mortar, it was built with blood. Millions of laborers, soldiers, peasants, and prisoners were forced into brutal conditions, many never making it out alive. Some call it the longest cemetery in the world, as the bodies of countless workers were said to be buried within its walls. So how did this massive structure come to be? What did it truly cost? And why was so much suffering poured into its creation? This is the brutal truth behind the Great Wall of China. First, let's put the size of this thing into perspective. It's hard to tell how long the wall was originally, since over 1/3 of it has completely disappeared. Over the years, parts of it have crumbled, and many of its stones were taken by locals nearby.
Officials in China say a section of the country's iconic Great Wall has been irreversibly damaged. Happened on a lesser-known portion of the historic wall in the Shanxi province. Authorities were notified of a gaping hole and determined heavy machinery caused it. The Washington Post reports they followed tread marks to an excavator. They arrested a man and woman working at a nearby construction site. People believe they destroyed part of that wall in order to create a shortcut.
But the Great Wall is still 21,000 kilometers long. That's like traveling from London to New York and back, twice. It also spans some difficult terrain. In fact, if you stood at one end and looked forward, you'd hardly see the rest of it. The wall stretches farther than you can even comprehend. It snakes its way across mountains and so much landscape, built to keep invaders out, but also serving as a symbol of China's strength.
This wall is so long that when it was being operated 400 years ago, guards in towers at the east end of the wall would witness the sunrise 1 hour and 20 minutes before guards at the western end of the same wall would witness the same event.
And you might have heard that it's the only man-made object visible from space. But that's actually a myth. However, I am sure you already knew that. It is hard to believe anyone would buy into a myth like that. Still, it is fascinating to think where this myth is coming from and why it is impossible to see it from space. The biggest problem is resolution. Basically, that's how well you can distinguish two objects from far away. Imagine driving at night and see an oncoming car. At first, its headlights look like one single light, but as it gets closer, you realize there are actually two. That's because your eyes can only resolve so much detail from a distance. Now apply that idea to space. The Great Wall is definitely long, but it's also really narrow, sometimes only 10 meters wide. That's like trying to see a human hair from a kilometer away. Basically impossible. Even from the International Space Station, which orbits much closer, the Great Wall would still appear incredibly thin, about 0.1 arc minutes across. For reference, an arc minute is a tiny unit of angle. There are 60 in 1 degree, and just 2 arc minutes is about the width of a dime from 150 feet, 45 meters away. 0.1 arc minutes is way smaller than that, far too small for the human eye to pick up. And to make matters worse, it blends into the landscape because it's made of stone that matches the surrounding terrain. Astronauts have actually tried looking for it, and none have been able to see it without the help of cameras with zoom lenses. Even China's first astronaut, Yang Liwei, admitted he couldn't spot it. It cannot even be seen from the moon, but if you checked it out from a closer orbit to Earth and knew exactly where to look, then you would probably find it. Still, that doesn't make the Great Wall any less impressive. Back in 221 BC, China wasn't the unified nation we know today. It was a collection of warring states constantly under threat from northern nomadic tribes, particularly the Xiongnu people. When Emperor Qin Shi Huang came into power, he decided that China needed a serious defense system. So he ordered the construction of a massive wall to keep out invaders. But the impressive megastructure you see now wasn't built from scratch. That would have taken way too long. Smaller walls already existed from previous kingdoms, and he had them all connected into one giant structure. But the Great Wall didn't stop evolving there. Later dynasties, especially the Ming Dynasty, expanded and reinforced it, creating the parts we see today. Now let's talk about the dark side of the Great Wall. It wasn't built by skilled architects sipping tea and drawing blueprints. Nope. It was built by forced labor, peasants, prisoners, and even soldiers. Imagine being ripped away from your family, marched to a desolate location, in order to build an enormous wall with your bare hands. Apparently, almost half of the men in China were used for this 2,000-year project. The conditions were brutal. Workers had little food, faced extreme weather like freezing winters, and were constantly pushed beyond their limits. Disease spread like wildfire, and accidents were common. People dropped dead from exhaustion, malnutrition, or injuries. But here's the most haunting part. Many of them were buried inside the wall itself. The bodies of the dead were used as part of the construction. It's said that as many as 400,000 people died during its construction. Some even believe that the wall is haunted by their spirits. One of the most famous stories tied to the Great Wall is the legend of Meng Jiangnu. It's a heartbreaking tale that shows just how much suffering the wall caused. The story goes like this. Meng Jiangnu was married to a man named Fan Xiliang, who was forcibly taken to work on the wall. For years, she waited for his return, but he never came back. One night, she had a terrible dream. Her husband was shivering and calling out, "Cold, cold." Realizing he might be suffering, she set out on a dangerous journey to find him. After traveling across mountains and rivers, she finally reached the construction site, only to hear the worst news. Her husband was dead and buried inside the wall. In absolute despair, she collapsed at the base of the wall and wept uncontrollably. She cried so hard and for so long that the wall cracked open, revealing her husband's bones. The story doesn't end there. Emperor Qin Shi Huang heard about this woman and instead of showing mercy, became obsessed with her beauty. He demanded she marry him. But Meng Jiangnu, heartbroken and furious, agreed on one condition. He must first give her husband a proper burial. After the funeral, she tricked the emperor, jumping into the sea instead of becoming his wife. The part where the wall opened up is likely untrue, but every other detail of the story makes sense. The legend basically reflects the pain and loss endured by countless families during the wall's construction. Even though there are so many stories and records that make this crime against humanity believable, skeptics still have their doubts. According to them, if so many people ended up dying in the Great Wall of China, then there should be cavities inside it. But surprisingly, there are little to none. What do you think is the reason for this? Now, after all that suffering, you'd think the Great Wall would have been the ultimate defense system, right? Well, it wasn't. While it helped slow down invasions, it wasn't completely impenetrable. The Mongols under Genghis Khan managed to break through, and later the Manchus from the north breached the wall and took over China, ending the Ming dynasty. So despite all the blood and sacrifice, it didn't fully succeed in keeping enemies out. But thankfully, the wall became more than just a defense barrier. It turned into a symbol of China's endurance and unity. Even though it didn't completely stop invasions, it became a representation of the country's strength and resilience. Today, the Great Wall is one of the most famous landmarks in the world. It attracts millions of tourists every year, with the most visited section being Badaling, just outside of Beijing. But many other parts of the wall are in ruins, with some sections disappearing due to erosion and neglect. In 1987, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, ensuring that it remains protected. But it's still a reminder of its dark history, a structure built not just with stone, but with human suffering. The Great Wall of China is a masterpiece of engineering, but it's also a graveyard. So the next time you see a picture of the Great Wall, or hear someone talk about how amazing it is, remember the blood, the tears, and the lives that made it possible. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this. See you in the next one.